am Remington Hernandez in Grayling at a place full of trees, and we'll tell you why. I'm standing here with Mrs. Susan Thiel of the DNR. So how are you doing today, Susan?
Oh, just fine, thank you.
We are at the W.J. Beale tree plantation, and it is full of a lot of history, and we're going to talk about the history. So can you tell us a bit more, Susan?
Well, back in the mid to late 1800s, all of northern Michigan was logged over very, very heavily. And that resulted in the question of how do we reforest our landscape. Forestry is a relatively young science, and we didn't know how to regenerate trees. Professor William J. Beale questioned that, and as part of the first Forestry Commission, proposed developing experimental stations across northern Michigan in order to determine how do we plant and grow trees. So this is one of the first experimental stations in which he did that.
And so he grew all kinds of trees here, or grew all kinds of trees here. They weren't just regular trees like you see in a forest. There were plants and other types of agricultural trees. Can you go into that?
Yes, they weren't sure how to grow trees, so they actually just went in and brought species from all over Europe and Russia and the United States. They brought in fruit trees, they brought in some agricultural crops, they harrowed and disked some areas and planted. Some areas they just planted with the grass and the natural vegetation just to see the survival, the spacing, and what would grow and what wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Now, this was years ago. This was in the 1800s that this was put here first. How did it survive so long?
Okay, this was planted in 1888. They continued to monitor. After a few years, they abandoned the agricultural crop portion of it, but they continued to monitor the forestry portion for the next 110 years. Because of its historical significance, we chose to preserve it, and then in 1999, we actually put up some interpretive signing and installed a trail to highlight that, part of being just an important forestry history area here in Grayling.
Now, it is surrounded by the Grayling Industrial Park. Was it hard to save it?
Well, actually, a lot of the land was subject for disposal, and then at the last minute, this was identified as a piece. Oh my gosh, this has historical significance. Let's save it. So it was actually set aside and pulled off of the disposal list. And then several years later, some retired foresters in Huron Pines came to us and said, let's do some development. So we had a committee, and voila, we have it now.
And this was a very important part of conservation in Michigan. It led to the start of one of the forestry agencies?
Yes, actually this is probably what we call the cradle of forestry in Michigan. You're standing in the general area of where your first state forest was, the first Forestry Commission, and this is kind of the birthplace of where we could learn how to reforest, which ended up reforesting a lot of the state land and private land around us. As a result, that was over 100 years ago. You have a nice reforested landscape that you work with today.
And this was one of the first in North America?
Yes, it is. Actually, this is one of the oldest and first plantings that they know of in North America and possibly in the entire United States.
So it's a very significant place with a lot of different trees at the time. Those trees, not all of them survived throughout the whole time, but there is still a very pretty landscape here. If people want to find this place, how can they?
Well, you would have to come through Grayling and turn off onto the Industrial Drive, the industrial park just to the east of town. There are signs that say Beale Plantation. You go down to the Industrial Drive and there is an entry sign and a small parking lot, and you'll be there.
So we're at the W.J. Beale tree plantation. A lot of history, a lot of very interesting things, a lot of good time to be had here. I'm Remington Hernandez standing with Susan Thiel in Grayling for My News 26.